Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Dingle Podcast. I'm, of course, Dingle, and today we're reviewing more old school WWWF coming from Madison Square Garden. Today's show coming on February the 17th, 2019, and that means the show we're looking at today turned 43 years old this month. How funky is that? How time flies. Because today's show is from February the 2nd, 1976, and it was a big stacked card. Included a great championship defense by Bruno Sammartino, and it would have included a tag team match had there not been for an issue involving one of the flights. But we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as and when we get to those matches. But there's 8 matches on this card. That's an awful lot to review. So we're just going to jump right into it with the first match. And that was Frank Monty versus Pete Sanchez. Now, these are 2 wrestlers that I didn't really know much about. And so when the new ring announcer, whose name was Buddy Wagner, got hold of the microphone, which on this occasion was dropping down from the ceiling. We've seen them sort of toying with the idea of having a handheld microphone as opposed to having one drop down from the ceiling. But we're back to the classic look today. And Buddy Wagner, the new ring announcer, lets us know who's wearing what, which made life nice and easy for me. And it made it easy for me to identify Frank Monty as the heel. And he gets off to a hot start, which especially helps. But it doesn't really do much, and the ref doesn't do anything either. Rick Sanchez fires up and hits a pretty poor drop kick. He sort of half got up for it, half didn't. And then Monty sells a punch that wasn't really thrown properly by Sanchez. I'd say it was quite a poor start to this match, because there was then some posturing and some collar and elbows before Sanchez gets a side headlock in. Monty counters it, gets him up against the ropes, sends him across the ring, and then hits a bad arm drag. Sanchez hits a head scissors, and then we're back to more headlocks. This, all in all, this process that it's taken me 2 minutes to describe to you, probably took somewhere about 5 minutes. I'm speeding up, because we've got a lot to review in half an hour today. We've got 8 matches. But yeah, it got off to quite a slow, sluggish start. And what that meant was that by sort of the halfway point of this match, the crowd was pretty dead. I do have to say, though, Vince McMahon's commentary was pretty good. He did a good job of selling both guys as powerful athletes. Frank Monty got sent into the corner quite hard. And then Sanchez with more headlocks. This was a real feature of the show, I noticed. Especially being a modern wrestling fan, which is a point that I'm trying to touch on quite a lot over the course of this podcast. It's interesting to see the baby faces applying headlocks and rest holds being very much babyface moves. I think the psychology was quite different back then. They were sort of appealing to the fans with the idea of the baby faces being the honest, hard-working guys that will try and perform some clean-cut wrestling, and the heels being more likely to beat you down and stomp on you and use slightly dirty, underhanded tactics. It's a totally different psychology. With 43 years now between this show and where we are today on the eve of the Elimination Chamber show, it's really, really interesting. And I think as I keep touching upon this sort of evolution that we're being able to view firsthand, because of course we started in 1973, we're able to get this transition occurring whereby something that used to be a babyface move in the form of a side headlock and rest holds is now something that the heels deploy. It's really, really cool to see that difference. So Monty manages to punch his way free and rakes the eyes of Sanchez to get some heat. Monty then misses a leg drop, which gives Sanchez the opportunity to hit his comeback. Monty gets it into the corner, but then hits a boot to the face and just pins Sanchez in 9 minutes and 21 seconds. This was a strange old match and I found it hard to give it a star rating because nothing was actively poor about it except for a couple of dodgy collar and elbows that looked pretty weak and fake, and one bad drop kick from Sanchez. But it wasn't really doing much for the crowd, and that's sort of the function of the opener. So all in all, I've gone half a star. I couldn't necessarily warrant it giving it negative stars. It's not that sort of a match. I didn't think it was bad enough that you could go into negatives for that, and it would be a bit harsh on those two. So moving on to match number 2, it was Francisco Flores taking on Louis Cyr, who was accompanied by Classy Freddie Blassie. And the first thing I noticed as they both get in the ring is Classy Freddie Blassie. This is, again, as a younger wrestling fan, I'm not necessarily used to managers all that much, and to proper weasel, evil little heel managers like Classy Freddie Blassie. But he's a really, really awesome scumbag manager, playing up to the crowd. One member of the crowd had some sort of faux toy skeleton that had all bendy bones, and Vince made a line about something to do with it possibly representing the bones and the lack of spine in Classy Freddie Blassie. And Blassie would try and goad Flores into attacking him and then hide behind Louis Cyr, all the classic old school manager stuff. It was great fun, and he was wearing a very extravagant golden outfit. So Louis Cyr is allegedly the strongest man in the world's grandson. That's quite the claim to fame, isn't it? So the match begins, and Flores does the leg lock on Cyr that I talked about last week in the midgets match, but he does it much better, and Cyr sort of has a weird way of selling it. So every time Flores would sort of go to crank it, Cyr would slap the mat like he was taking a back bump, but of course he wasn't. It didn't do much for me because it was pretty blatant attempt to sell a move that isn't hurting you in any way. But either way, Flores slips, and Cyr's able to use this as an opportunity to get the headlock in. Louis Cyr, the obvious heel, especially if you're accompanied by Classy Freddie Blassie, you don't have much of a say in that, I suppose. He gets sent into the ropes before Flores hits a hip toss. Oh, let me turn over. Lots of notes for this show. So Cyr starts beating on Flores and chokes him on the ropes for the heat. That was a common theme, the choking for the heat, but also choking people on the ropes. That was something that people kind of up and down the show did quite a lot of. So Flores fires up, and he hits lots and lots of heavy-looking punches that are really kind of theatrical. Cyr cuts him off with some headbutts and stomps to the midriff, and then we get the heat on Flores. And he walks on him. Sorry, Louis Cyr sort of, the old Andre the Giant stand on you spot, just pace across you in a very obviously fake move. Yeah, that got a near fall. So Flores eventually hits a comeback, a headbutt and a splash for a near fall, which seemed like a decent combo to actually get a pin. I'm surprised that wasn't a pinning combo. It was almost a near fall that got me. Even me, a snarky little smarky wrestling fan, can get worked nowadays by old school stuff. Eventually, Cyr hits a knee strike to get the heat back in, hits a scoop slam, and then goes for a rolling senton, which he misses. Flores misses a splash, and then Cyr hits a big boot, and his finishing move is a shoulder breaker to give him the win in 9 minutes and 16 seconds, very similar time to the opening match. Most of the matches on this show lasted around 10 minutes, in that sort of range. And I went 1.5 stars for this match. I think it was better worked. The selling was better, the pacing was good, the psychology was there. I enjoyed this match, but of course, these shows early on are pretty basic in terms of the actual moves being performed. And being a modern wrestling fan, that doesn't necessarily do all that much for me. But, it was a decent match, and so I went 1.5 stars. Louis Cyr was billed to be on the next show on the 1st of March, and you know what? I'm really sad we're not going to be able to watch that show. It's not available on the network, and you'll learn why that is in a little while. So the next match was Spiros Arion, the Golden Greek, the man who, on the last 2 shows that we saw in 1975, was challenging Bruno Sammartino unsuccessfully for the World Heavyweight Championship on 2 occasions. The first time he got screwed, and then the second time he tapped out clean to Bruno. And he was taking on a young Kevin Sullivan. A young Kevin Sullivan with hair. Now, I've only really known 2 types of Kevin Sullivan. There's the road agent Kevin Sullivan with no hair, and there's the Dungeon of Doom Kevin Sullivan who's got, just the tiniest little bit of hair at the back. So seeing him with hair and seeing him so young was really weird, and he was kind of stocky, and he had kind of a long fringe sort of hairstyle going on, and he had quite a baby face, and all of this together, combined with his sort of short stature, meant that he really reminded me of Samwise Gamgee. In all seriousness, if I was to go and get an image of, if you were to go and look for a photo of a young Kevin Sullivan, he looks just like Sam from Lord of the Rings. It's really, really weird. So the match begins, and Arion initially starts off on top. There's some collar and elbows. Arion gets sent into the ropes, and Kevin Sullivan hits a hip toss for a near fall. In fact, for a 1. Sorry. Is that a near fall? I've often wondered that. Is a near fall a 1 count? Or is it a 2? I never quite understand what a near fall means. Is that just a cover where you don't get the pin? Or does it have to be a 2? I suppose if it's a 2, then it's nearer than a 1. But is a 1 still a near fall because you've covered them? But then what's a far fall? Is a 1 a far fall? What's what? I don't know. Wrestling. Anyway, Arion misses a punch and Kevin Sullivan hits a scoop slam and goes back to a headlock. It was, as I say, a really popular move for the babyfaces on this show. Arion manages to get himself to the ropes and then beats on Kevin. Kevin Sullivan wins a punch trading contest that happens in the corner and really clobbers Arion when he's got him in a headlock. He kind of gets a headlock on and then brings his arms down on Arion's neck and the back of Arion's head, and this gets him a 1 count. Sullivan fires up, hits a monkey flip, goes for a second one, but misses it, and Spiros Arion hits the atomic drop to get the pin. This match was alright. I can't remember what I gave it star-wise. I think, looking back on it, it was 2 stars. It was really well worked, and Kevin Sullivan is a very energetic young babyface on this show, and it was good fun to see him. And it's unusual, I think, to see, especially in this sort of time period, you're seeing a lot of the most successful wrestlers of the 1980s just starting to break through, and that's really, really cool. But it also gives me it makes me feel very strange about doing these reviews because, I grow up only knowing wrestlers to wrestle one way and to be one character, and to see people like Greg Valentine on the last show who looked really, really young, and to see Kevin Sullivan now looking so young, it's just so cool, and yet also kind of a bit freaks me out. Does freak me out a bit. The passage of time. So, the next match was Dominic DeNucci against Ernie Ladd. He was billed as the King Ernie Ladd. He was billed as the Big Cat Ernie Ladd. He was billed as the Big Daddy Ernie Ladd in this one match. 3 different nicknames for Ernie Ladd. How very strange. How very out there. How very odd. And so, having never really seen Ernie Ladd before, and knowing that he was something of a favourite in the WWE, he comes out and starts this match, and I didn't really understand why, because he didn't seem to be very good. I understand he used to be a successful football player. I don't know if he went to the Pro Bowl. They may have mentioned. I might Google that afterwards, find out whether or not he did play in the Pro Bowl. But this showing, I was thoroughly unimpressed, in all honesty. So the match begins, and he's arguing with the ref. He takes ages to actually get going, and he's selling his thumb at the start of this match as well. He's got this little bit of bandage around his thumb. Maybe he broke his thumb. Who knows? But Vince pointed out that he's been selling it for a long time. So is it kind of like a Cowboy Bob Orton deal, but just with his thumb? That's odd. I don't quite understand. Either way, DeNucci gets some punches away, and we get some collar and elbows. A clean break by DeNucci, and then another collar and elbow. Ernie Ladd hits a really dodgy-looking hip toss, and then starts choking on DeNucci to get the heat. Beats him down in the corner. DeNucci eventually turns it around, and Ernie Ladd does the old begging for a timeout. He makes a T sign. Makes the T sign and holds up his fingers in the 2. Puts 2 fingers up in the air as though to say 2-minute warning, because you see he used to play football. Ha 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 ha. Ernie eventually gets the heat back and chokes him. DeNucci throws himself into the turnbuckle for Ernie. It was really annoying to see DeNucci selling as much as he did for Ernie, and Ernie just not really being capable of doing much himself. DeNucci fires up, but Ernie Ladd cuts him off with a punch and pins him with his feet on the top rope. And I have to say, one of the cool aspects is seeing, these enormous 6'9", 6'10" guys, because all of these wrestlers back then were actually really tall for some reason. They're all like sort of not like the best looking muscular guys in the world, as you would expect for old school wrestling, but they were more sort of lanky string bean types, as we'll come to see in the main event, with the exception probably of superstar Billy Graham. Not that many people on the show looked like Vince McMahon traditional big dudes that would get over. And Ernie Ladd he's big, but in a different kind of way to most other wrestlers. And to see him be able to just effortlessly stretch out his feet to get his feet on the top rope for leverage, as opposed to the middle rope, I think that goes to show that point. better than any other. And unfortunately, this match was really boring. It didn't do much for me. And Ernie Ladd, I found generally quite nothing throughout this match. Danucci was okay. I've gone minus a star. I couldn't really justify giving it any more than that. It just wasn't very good. I'm sorry, but it just wasn't. So, we move on to the Battle of the Ivans, as it was billed by the commentator. Ivan Putski versus Ivan Koloff, who was accompanied by Captain Lou Albano. Ivan Koloff, former WWWF champion, the man that ended Bruno Sammartino's first reign as champion on the day that Madison Square Garden fell silent. And so Ivan Putski begins the match, and I've seen Ivan Putski before, and after the match he was a really energetic, charismatic guy, and that came across when he entered here as well, wearing a t-shirt that said Polish Power. He's a little bit smaller in the belly area than it was the last time we saw him, although the last time we saw him was late 1973. And Ivan was really, really up for this match as he got into the ring. And Vince was kind of gawking over the size of Ivan Putski, as you would expect. And Ivan Koloff comes down, and he's got the Russian hat on. And Lou Albano wasn't the most hated manager on the show. That award obviously went to Freddie Blassie. But Lou Albano, I've seen him before more hated, which I found odd. Although when I last saw him that hated, it was when he was wrestling against Gorilla Monsoon. And if anything's going to make you a heel, I think wrestling against Gorilla Monsoon might do the job back in the 1970s in New York City. So the match starts, and they do the old... In fact, it was kind of... I don't know if I was necessarily expecting to see the shoulder blocks where neither of the big guys move. Because Ivan Koloff was sort of... He was a big guy, but he was an elusively big guy. He didn't look necessarily as stacked or as dense as Ivan Putski. But he was a big dude. And they do the old shoulder blocks, but neither sell it. Which is a spot that I thought really developed nowadays. I didn't necessarily... I mean, it's not that it didn't make sense. It certainly made sense that you get that sort of thing. But yeah, I suppose I just always associated that more with modern wrestling. We get a test of strength, which is always good fun. And Ivan Putski looks like he's about to lose it. And then he just lifts Ivan Koloff up in the air. And he seats Koloff on the top rope. Hits a punch, but Koloff doesn't really sell it. And Koloff hits some punches of his own as he gets down off the top rope to get the heat. Ivan starts firing up, and he's just so charismatic. He's like wiggling his hips and stuff, and the crowd's just going nuts for him. He had a sort of fun-loving big guy aura, and that's very difficult, I think, to come across unless you're a naturally charismatic guy. He gets a side headlock in, and then a snapmare and a chin lock, but Koloff eventually reverses it with a hair pull to escape. And then he puts a bear hug in, and he had this bear hug in for a very, very, very long time. And Putski's selling it and selling it and selling it and pulling some really funny faces as he pops out his cheeks. I don't know if I can stay in this for much long. Oh, I may have to submit. It was that kind of... That's what I think he would have said. That's what I think he would have said in that circumstance. So eventually, he's able to break the grip of Ivan Koloff. And then Koloff just rakes his eyes to get the heat back. Putski ends up on the outside of the ring. Ivan Koloff runs into the ring. In fact, Ivan Koloff, he runs Putski's head into the ring post. But by this time, they're both on the outside. Koloff had to follow Putski to the outside. And the match ends in a double count out. The fans chant, "This is bullshit." Putski leads them in that chant. And there's a little bit of shenanigans after the bell. A little bit of handbags after the bell. So I gave this match 1 star. It was a good big babyface versus big heel battle. And I can understand why they wanted to give the rub to Ivan Putski. But at the same time, Ivan Koloff's a big deal. You can't just have him suddenly totally irrelevant in the context of the WWWF. That just makes no sense. And so we move on to the midgets match. Because, of course... midgets matches are so very, very necessary, aren't they? And this match was Billy the Kid and Little Johnny against Little Louie and Bobo Johnson. Or as he was billed here, the Coco Kid. Because that's not racist. And yeah, do you know what? I only realised at the end of this show, with the last match, just that every single tag team match has to be 2 out of 3 falls. I didn't realise that was the case, but I do now. Eventually, after enough of these tag team matches, you do put 2 and 2 together. So the match begins, and irritatingly, these matches in the middle of the card always seem to go the longest, and that was the case with this one here. So Billy and Louie start, and they do some collar and elbows. The ref does a couple of the comedy spots that we got in the last match. And it makes no sense, because the heel midgets start attacking the ref, and he should just DQ them, because the referees did that later on in the night. Very, very, very silly. Anyway, Billy gets a headlock in. Coco tries to run over, or Bobo rather, tries to run over, but the ref carries him back into the corner because they're little. Haha, do you get the comedy? Billy and Johnny get the heat in on little Louie. Bobo gets the hot tag, and they start attacking Johnny. Eventually, Billy and Louie chase each other around the ring, because you have to have spots in these matches where the little people are running around like headless chickens. Billy eventually tags in, gets the heat on Bobo, but then just he at one point he just does a stomp and just completely misses, and it's so obvious on the camera. And yeah, Vince has to try and put that over. And to be fair to Vince, he did a good job. In fact, I'd say Vince did a great job all night. He was good on this show. Vince McMahon, on this show, you get a thumbs up from me, buddy. Well done. If only you got a thumbs up from me for your booking nowadays, then I'd be a very happy wrestling fan. Then I'd be reviewing modern wrestling because I'd like it. Anyway, Billy refuses to tag in, which was a funny spot, because you get a little bit of shenanigans with the heels where they, disagree, so Billy refused to tag in. Louis does tag in. They hit the heels double teams, again backfire. Johnny and Billy argue. The babyface moves backfire as well. Bobo hits a shoulder block and gets a roll up for the 3. Little Louie then gets a full Nelson in on Billy the Kid. Bobo tags in, he puts a full Nelson on, and Billy gets to the ropes. Johnny then tags in, trades some biting back and forth with Billy the Kid, because of course the babyfaces have to cheat, don't they? That makes all the sense in the world. There's then a backdrop on Bobo, which Bobo completely no-sells, and rams Billy the Kid's face into the corner, hits a backdrop, tags Little Louie. Little Louie does a couple of slingshots and pins Johnny, because the second slingshot sent him into Billy the Kid. And the babyface midgets won. And you know what? This was way better than the last one. There was much less comedy bullshit. I think it makes a difference. There was something about Little Johnny that I think was much better than Lord Littlebrook, who was in this match last time. In fact, 3 of the competitors were different, and all of them seemed to be better in their own ways. I think Bobo Johnson was a much better babyface in terms of his offense. And I think the heels last time were really poor, especially Little Tokyo. I really didn't enjoy his work. But I'd certainly say that Little Johnny was very, very good in this match, and Billy the Kid was kind of he was where he needed to be in this match. So yeah, it's the first time I've ever seen a 2 out of 3 falls match end 2-0. Every other one's gone 2-1, but then I got it again at the end of the show. Strange. Either way, I gave this match a half a star, which I think was fair, and a decent reflection of sort of the limitations of these workers. And it was probably about as well as they could have done. But obviously the role of these midget matches is to calm the crowd down for the more exciting stuff on the card. And speaking of the more important matches on the card, the next match that we get was the WWWF Championship match between Bruno Sammartino and Billy Graham. Now, the start of this match is missing on the network. You do actually miss them ringing the bell, and I think you miss up to the first 2.5 minutes of this match, which is annoying. But either way, you get thrown straight into it because Billy Graham is whipping Bruno into the corner with quite a lot of force. And a point that was clear throughout this match was that Bruno did an awesome job of selling for the challenger. Whoever it was that was up against him, Bruno was really, really happy to make them look as strong as possible. So Billy gets some elbow smashes and a surfboard stretch. You know, when they just pull back on the arms for the heat. Bruno takes ages and ages, and his facial expressions are really, really strong. And he finally reverses the pressure, and the crowd goes mental. Billy has to cower and run away. Bruno hits a backdrop. Sorry, sometimes I fail to read my own notes. How very silly of me. And Billy's pleading with Bruno, but Bruno begins his punching and he Irish whips into a big boot from Billy, and Billy starts stomping on Bruno and gets the heat. Goes after Bruno's leg, rams it into the ring post, and Billy then hits a snapmare and goes up top for a knee drop but misses it. And Bruno pushes him into the ropes, and then Billy gets his leg worked on. Bruno getting some revenge. Billy again pleads for mercy like the horrible heel that he is. But Bruno's selling was really good. About 2 seconds later, when Billy was able to use this little moment of begging for mercy, this little feint to get a full Nelson in, and this full Nelson was in for a while. And Bruno's really selling it facially fantastically, and he's starting to go limp, and the crowd, they're starting to fall a little bit quiet because no one's ever used to Bruno Sammartino losing. Bruno eventually breaks it and puts on his own full Nelson, but Billy gets to the ropes. We then get a collar and elbow, and Billy gets the advantage and beats on Bruno for the heat and hits a scoop slam, and then he goes back up to the top rope, and Billy, the superstar Billy Graham, goes for another big elbow drop. I think that's what he went for the first time, like a knee drop, but he misses it again, and Bruno sends Graham to the outside. He rams his head into the ring post, and Billy, I believe, bladed, and it became clear pretty quickly that this was quite a deep blade job, because sort of the bleeding starts and you can notice it a little bit, and Vince calls it because Vince knows it's coming, and all of a sudden it goes from like a clean face to being his face is covered in blood in like 10-15 seconds. It's so quick. Oh, sorry, a few technical difficulties there. I think it's all resolved now. And so yes, Billy Graham's face covered in blood so quickly, and Bruno's just beating on him and taking advantage of this opportunity, and he's beating on him, and then the referee just calls for the bell. And that's how this one finished. Billy Graham got very upset afterwards and declared that I'm not finished, I'm still ready, I'm not down, I'm still ready. And there was a little bit of shenanigans, a little bit of a brawl after the match. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was a really fun match, and Bruno Sammartino's ability to hold a crowd in the palm of his hand with his selling is just second to none. It's really strong, emotive selling that he's able to do, and he really makes his challengers look like absolute stars in the ring. And obviously we know that the next champion is in fact Billy the Superstar Graham. He's the guy that dethroned Bruno, and this perhaps the first chapter in a long story to play out there, because Bruno will see out the year as champion before 1977, when Billy will eventually dethrone Bruno Sammartino. And the next match, a bit of a come down from an absolute classic, was Baron Mikel Cicluna against Irish Pat Barrett. This was a very simple squash match. Baron makes a hot start. Pat Barrett actually gets a surprising amount of offense in for a squash match. And then it finishes when Baron Mikel Cicluna hits a big boot for the pin. And that was literally that. There's nothing else to report on that match. I have no other words about it. It's pretty boring in terms of the star rating. I actually went minus a star and a half. I really didn't like it. It wasn't that anything was wrong necessarily. It was just so boring and just sort of flat and absolutely nothing happening. And Mikel Cicluna is the most uncharismatic dude I've seen in just forever. But then they announced the card for March the 1st, and this is why I wish this was on the network, because Ric Flair's on this card. So too is Fabulous Moolah, who we haven't seen before. She's going to be defending her title against Susan Green, and the tag team titles will be on the line when Tony Sedan and Tony Parisi defend against Ivan Koloff and Billy Graham. What a team that is. And the main event was Bruno Sammartino against the big cat Ernie Ladd. And, you know, that's the sort of card that I'm disappointed that we don't actually get to see. And that leads us nicely onto the final match of the night. And it was the team of Bobo Brazil? No, the team of Crusher Blackwell and Bugsy McGraw against Bobo Brazil and Tony Parisi. Yes, Bobo Brazil filling in for Tony Sedan, who was stranded in Vancouver at the airport, according to Vince McMahon. And so Bobo and Blackwell start this match, and it's a poor grappling sequence. I did a bit of research on Crusher Blackwell. The guy died at 45 in 1995. The guy was really young in this match. And another thing I noticed was that Bobo Brazil looked really old. It was because Bobo Brazil was 52. It was incredible. It was nuts to see this big dude who's so young, and Bobo Brazil who's so old. And Bobo kind of again is getting the upper hand. And Bobo's got a similar sort of physical shape to Ernie Ladd. They're both quite tall and skinny, and Bobo's kind of got a little bit of a hunch in his back. And then he just did a head scissors. Although he was supported by Blackwell really well, I was surprised that he managed to do it. Either way, he tags in Tony Parisi, who goes in for a headlock. He tags in Bobo. We get more headlocks. Blackwell escapes, forces Bobo up against the ropes, hits a corner splash and tags McGraw, and then we get the heat. Get a few double team moves. Bugsy does some very bad Irish whips. Bugsy McGraw seemed to be incapable of Irish whipping anybody. He'd either let go of their hand too late, or he'd Irish whip them in the wrong direction. Bobo then hits a corner big boot. Bobo hits a corner big boot. Blackwell tags in and gets a bear hug in on Bobo. And then we actually get, this bear hug was in for a good minute and a half, and they do a split screen camera shot, which I wasn't expecting. They went to a shot of Bugsy on the apron, and also the shot of, obviously, Bobo in the bear hug at the hands of Blackwell. God, there's lots of B's in this match, aren't there? Bobo, Blackwell, Bugsy. Either way, then Bobo tags Parisi, but the ref didn't see it, and nor did we, because the camera missed it. So Bobo has to stay in. The heels get the heat with some double team maneuvers. Bugsy uses the tag rope to choke Bobo, and the ref sees this and disqualifies him. And the first fall goes to the babyfaces. This gives Bobo a chance to catch his breath, and then he fires up on Blackwell, hits all sorts of moves, tags in Tony Parisi, who hits some stomps, but the cover's broken up by Bugsy. He tags Bobo, who hits a headbutt. That is again broken up by Bugsy McGraw. But then Bugsy tries to interfere again and gets thrown to the outside. Then Bobo and Parisi hit a double backdrop on Blackwell. And then Tony hits a scoop slam, goes to the top rope, and hits a flying knee drop to the chest for the win. And I gave this match 1 star. Total, it went about 12 minutes, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Bobo was decent. Tony Parisi, for me, was really the glue of this match. He had the athleticism that Bobo didn't necessarily have, but he also had the nous. But Bobo, I have to say, psychology-wise, did really well, and he did carry a lot of the match in terms of the in-ring work. The heels, who obviously will usually call matches, they were uninspiring in this match, and I don't have much of a desire to see either of them again, although they were two good, mean-looking, nasty heels, and they at least were there for the big spots at the end. So, yeah, I gave this match 1 star. And so overall for this show, I've gone with 1.5 stars. It was a big show full of snappy matches, and that's kind of something that I personally prefer, as opposed to what we got the first time we did a 2-hour show, which was 6 matches that all went about 15 to 20 minutes, and most of them weren't very good. As opposed to now, 8 matches, most of them going 10 to 12 minutes. It keeps that snappy feel about the show. It makes it easier to digest, easier to watch in one go. And even when there's a bad wrestling match, it's usually sandwiched between 2 good ones, which is something that I've noticed as well. They tended to avoid giving you 2 matches that they knew were going to be sort of crowd killers in a row. And the good thing is that if it's a good wrestling match, it will get the crowd invested. It's not like nowadays where you can have, what AJ Styles and Daniel Bryan had at the Royal Rumble, which is an amazingly sound technical wrestling match that the crowd just don't give a shit about. If the match is good, the crowd will buy into it, and that reliability allows you to say, okay, we're going to put 2 workers that are good on here and 2 workers that are bad on just after them, and then we're going to follow it up with another great match, because that then sandwiches the deadness of the crowd. So, yeah, a predominantly good show with a fantastic main event for the WWWF Championship, and I just wish we could see that Ric Flair show in a month's time, but the next show on the network isn't until June, and I look forward to reviewing it with you then. Have a lovely, lovely week, and I'll speak to you again after a little while. Thanks again for listening. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy these podcasts. They're coming every week, hopefully. I'm trying to decide on an absolute certain day that I'll do them. But for the time being, have a lovely, lovely week.